So I always actually wanted to be a lawyer because I always felt like a real connection to nature and the environment. So much of my time was spent practices outside. Long summer days in Pennsylvania growing up, you really get to know the outdoors and you change of season and you have a lot of admiration and respect for Mother Nature. And I thought there were many ways that you can go about trying to protect the environment. One way I thought that suited me, it was the law. And so I always sort of had that in my head that I wanted to be a lawyer. And turns out that's what I ended up initially pursuing before I decided to pursue many other things.
That's awesome. And so how much does being a lawyer affect your day-to-day now?
I think it's fundamental to how I approach problem solving. They teach you in law school this IRAC method. It's issue, reasoning, analysis, and conclusion. And it gives you a very diligent way of being able to identify what is happening, applying some reasoning to it, doing the work to understand and analyze it, and then hopefully being able to articulate a conclusion. I think getting a law degree, I would not change anything about that process for myself. It made me a better writer, it made me more analytical, and it enabled me to, oddly enough, tackle hard things like a municipal budget. Because when you're used to evaluating data, data can be numbers, data can be words. And so it gives you a framework really for understanding.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that that's sports and law. That's a very unique combination of your background that I think really serves you well. I know you recently took a trip to France. It was for Ocean Invest Day, right? Tell me a little bit about your trip.
So it feels like a parallel universe, like absolutely surreal. So last year I was the mayor of Sausalito. Sausalito actually rotates the mayor. So my first year I was the vice mayor because I had gotten the most votes. And then I moved up to become the mayor. And being the mayor, even though it's a small town, really opens a lot of conversations. And you have the opportunity to speak to a lot of other mayors. And I had already been doing a lot of work internationally around ocean health, coastal adaptation. I'd gone to Monaco Ocean Week. I went to the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon. I was on a panel at both of those. And I became very friendly with some folks from the French Ocean and Climate Platform. And we continued to do things in the States together. And then they called me up one day and said, the US Embassy in Paris is looking for a US mayor who's working on, and they listed all the things exactly that I was working on. And it also happens that the US ambassador to France, Ambassador Bauer, actually has a home in Belvedere, and that is right across from Sausalito. And so there was this nice California connection going on. So this is back in November, and they invited me, and I went to Paris. I got to speak to the Association of French Mayors. So I was on stage with ministers and other environmental leaders. Then I went to the Salon de Mer, which is the innovation hotbed, and got really just inspired and doing a lot of sort of subnational climate diplomacy work. And I made such good relationships and met so many new, wonderful, smart people that we decided that we wanted to do something together in the future. And so I went to the embassy and I articulated an opportunity and applied for their grant program. And they provided it to us to be able to go to France a couple weeks ago. The first effort was in Biarritz at the Waves of Change conference. And while we were there, we put together a coastal adaptation / blue economy workshop. I was on a panel with other female climate leaders, and then I got to judge 2 different startup competitions. And then we went to Paris, where we got to partner with this amazing organization called the Hub Institute. And our focus, we called it Ocean Invest Day. And the idea is that the United Nations Ocean Conference on the Oceans is going to be in Nice, France in 2025. And so we wanted to start to plant the seeds for that conversation in Paris, in France, around ocean health. And the Olympics are in Paris in 2024. So you have 2 opportunities for a global stage to talk about climate.
Wow, super exciting stuff. And it's so fun to travel and learn and see how other cities and states and countries are handling this. And obviously, I mean, you mentioned Biarritz, which is, on the coast, and Sausalito. So I'm sure there was a lot of knowledge sharing. Did you plan on hosting the French in Sausalito soon?
Well, it's funny you asked that. So I had mentioned I met the French Ocean and Climate Platform folks in Monaco and then in Lisbon. They ended up doing an event in Santa Cruz, California. And their sister city, the Santa Cruz sister city, is Biarritz. So I met the mayor of Biarritz and we became very friendly. And then I saw her again in November and we had more conversations. And so going back was like seeing an old friend who's dealing with all the same issues that we are. They have big beaches and they're dealing with beach nourishment issues and losing a lot of their beaches. To be able to continue that dialogue, we call it, and I mentioned already, subnational diplomacy. So this idea that those of us who are not federal electeds can still have really meaningful conversations to advance mutual goals.
Yeah, that's great. Is there an opportunity to bring them to California and show them all the amazing work that you're doing and obviously all of the organizations you're affiliated with and kind of plug them into how California's handling things?
Yeah, I think so. And Casey, you know this because of the work you do in the climate space, that even though we could be so far apart and it's a 12-hour, plane ride, we're really all in it together. And the level of camaraderie and collegiality that I have seen in the climate space and with my work on coastal adaptation and ocean health has been just mind-blowing. It's phenomenal because not only did I have a relationship now with the mayor of Biarritz, but then I spoke and now I'm friends with the minister of the ecological transition, a woman named Barbara Pampili, and spoke with a woman who is the president of the French regions, President Carol Delga. And we're all dealing with these issues and trying to figure out, how do you electrify? How do you decarbonize? And sharing these ideas. And in fact, when I was with President Delga, her staff shared with me a lot of work they were doing around hydrogen and offshore wind and floating wind farms. And so they shared something with me that was actually coming out of UC Berkeley that I wasn't aware of. Just this wonderful opportunity to share lessons. And it's really, frankly, I think the only way we're going to make sure, if even possible, to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius and really continue that work.
Right. Well, and I love that you're globally connected and really just looking for thoughts and ideas and resources around the globe. Not to sound corny, but like rising tide floats all boats, right? Like,
that's a great analogy right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about your organization, the Center for Sea Rise Solutions, and what you're doing and how that is sort of part of the knowledge share, as you travel around.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So when I was running for office, I was campaigning during COVID, and that meant I had a lot of, I consider them very intimate one-on-one conversations with members of the Sausalito community because we weren't doing big events. And even though we were doing Zoom, a lot of people still wanted to meet me in person. And so I got to really know people here and understand the intellectual power that lives in this community. And I was just so inspired by that as I started to do more work around coastal adaptation and climate resilience. I thought, how do I take the work that we're doing here in Sausalito and then share that nationally and now internationally, but then also take the learnings I'm gathering nationally, internationally, and bring them back to not just the Bay Area, but also bring it back to the state of California. How do I learn from that? The initial inclination and mission vision of Center for Sea Rise Solutions is to build coastal competency around local decision makers. And that was initially around elected officials. And now we've extended that, I think, very appropriately to include port authorities and other individuals or entities that are controlling sort of large areas that are coastal. So it's an opportunity for us to learn. And in fact, on the heels of this work internationally, at the end of July, we're actually hosting a resilient infrastructure workshop here in Sausalito at the Army Corps Bay model. And we'll share a lot of the learnings that we have. We'll bring them back to California and try to sort through a lot of those issues here. And the work we've done internationally and nationally will inform that work we're doing here in the state.
Wow, it's really exciting. And I definitely will be following along. I hear you talking about Sea Rise Solutions. You've been in leadership of a city on the bay, basically at sea level. But I know that a lot of those issues sort of reverberate out beyond just climate. I know you've kind of spoken about the sort of intersection of climate and social issues as well. Talk me through that. What sort of experience have you had where all of those things are sort of coming together, right, in terms of solutions and action?
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of that question because I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us in the state of California and nationally to really bring some new ideas, a new vision. When I think about the issues that are most pressing in this state and within my community, I'm always thinking about job creation, I'm thinking about affordable housing and homelessness, and I'm thinking about climate and how do we address those issues with an equity lens? And how do you make sure that every member of your community is taken care of? And so the state of California, I think, has really done a phenomenal job from a policy perspective in looking towards the green energy transition, looking towards electrification, figuring out how to bring new renewable energy online. That was a really wonderful, powerful beginning. And now the hard work begins even more so, which is how do you encourage this transition towards green energy? How do you make sure that we are mitigating climate risk and enhancing climate resilience in the face of post-COVID economic recovery? When we know that a lot of people don't have homes, when affordable housing is really hard to find, when we want to make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are taken into account. That intersectionality with climate, I think, is the next big opportunity for us in the state of California. How do we figure out how to handle all those things with this changing climate and new opportunities communities around policy.
The unfortunate truth is that those are the people that's going to affect first, the unhoused and lower income communities that are really have a lack of defense when it comes to infrastructure and obviously the sea level rise. And it's sort of, those are the ones that need the most help. I think that's really interesting when we talk about not only climate issues as an environmental issue, but really social issues as well. Everything's related, and it is sort of a domino effect where climate issues then become housing issues. So it's really exciting to hear you sort of frame things in that way. It's really awesome.
I think it's a lot of it's because I've learned so much serving my community here in Sausalito. I've lived here since 2001. I was on and off the planning commission for 10 years. My background was as a land use environmental lawyer, so I understood that space. And I ran for city council because I wanted us to take stronger action around resilient infrastructure, around flooding, around disaster preparedness. It's been really interesting to learn how to communicate with different people around these issues. But remarkably, even though we have a small community, we had a homeless encampment. As the mayor, I dealt with that issue. We had to come up with a housing element. I was on the housing element committee. We always wanted to diversify our tax base. I just launched a blue economy innovation ecosystem, right? So you get to really see a full breadth of the issues in your community. So long as you understand that they're all interrelated, I think it was very powerful. And so I started to think, well, how do you address these at scale? How can we come together and help one another?
Being involved in the community for so long, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a community leader and public and private sector?
I think the big issue, and it's not unique to Sausalito, is aging infrastructure. A long time ago, Thomas Friedman wrote a really interesting op-ed in the New York Times. And I mean like 15 years ago, maybe even longer, talking about how infrastructure in the United States was really lagging behind other countries. And in our own community, we have aging infrastructure around sanitation, around our roadways, around our storm drains. And I think that's plaguing communities around the world and certainly around the state of California. And so that's a big issue because those are expensive projects. The good news, though, is that at the federal level, at the state level, we've seen some new funding around climate resilience that actually are infrastructure monies, right? So the Jobs and Infrastructure Act is an opportunity to make your infrastructure more climate resilient. And that allows communities to take a hard look at all their different systems and ask themselves, because resiliency really means, can you come back after you have had an impact, right? And so what happens if you have a flood? Do you completely mess up your storm drain system? Or is it resilient in the manner that, okay, you can withstand these massive, high intensity storms that we're getting at greater frequency? And so I think infrastructure is one of the largest issues. And then, of course, not to be repetitive, comes a conversation around housing, right? How do you accommodate the need for new housing and the need for affordable housing when you have aging infrastructure? And how do you do that when you know you have water shortages? And right, so it becomes a conversation where you have to be really agile and ready to connect a lot of different dots.
Working at the city level, what sort of participation or resourcing have you been able to tap into from a state and federal level? Are there resources that have sort of been there for you? I mean, I think you mentioned a few things there, but yeah, what's that like?
I think we've been remarkably fortunate, and I don't know if I actually even told you this, so it's a great question because I love the answer. So as I mentioned earlier, this climate community is so helpful to one another, and you really can learn from each other. And down in Burlingame, there is a special district called One Shoreline, and it's focused on developing more climate resilient sea level rise policies for the area around San Mateo and Burlingame, particularly because San Francisco Airport is there. I got introduced to their executive director, Len Matterman, and one of their board members, Donna Colson, and they really educated me on how you look for state monies and how you look for federal monies. And through their mentorship and inspiration, I went to our state assembly person last year and just went for it. I requested $4 million to develop a vulnerability assessment and a roadmap for a path forward for Sausalito to respond to sea level rise and flooding. And we didn't get $4 million, we got $1 million. And that was huge. And Sausalito had never gotten that amount of money. And when people say, well, how did you do it? I sort of chuckled. Obsessed. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
Sometimes it's that simple. And so I'm really, really appreciative of what then Assemblyperson Levine did, and now Assemblyman Connolly is furthering, and the folks at Keller, we administer the grants. So it's there, but you really do have to develop the technical capacity to understand where to go. And so that's the type of information that I now want to share with others to say, okay, look, I did it. Here's how you do it.
We're actually partnering currently with the city of Modesto on one of their programs, working with the homeless, their initiative tackling homelessness here. And part of it is that there's a lot of work being done, but no one knows knows about it. And there's a lot of money out there to fund these programs, connecting those two things like, hey, we're over here, we're doing a great job. And meanwhile, the state of California is like, who's doing a good job? Who can we give money to? So I think just communicating those efforts, I think, is a huge part of it. And then I love your story. It's like, how do you get $1 million to fund these programs? Ask for 4.
Right. That's right. That's right. And who do you go to and how do you ask? What does the ask look like is always a really interesting process.
Yeah. And I would assume there's no like mayor school or how do you learn these things or even know that they're out there, right?
Yeah, because you have really great peers and colleagues and you've got to ask. I think one of the things I carry over from, again, my athletic background, and after playing sports in college, I became a competitive rower and then I became a competitive cyclist and now I'm an ultra runner. And the truth is there's no substitute for hard work. There just isn't. Yeah. And so if you want to take action and you want to set out a goal and move forward to achieve it, you have to roll up your sleeves and do the work. People are always looking for, suddenly you have this success. It's like, yes, it is a 20-year overnight success. That's right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. To go back to the team sport analogy too, like you're not working in a silo, you're not working in an echo chamber, you're out there networking and talking to people and seeing how they're handling it. So I think you're really good at that. It sounds like you're really good at asking questions and what other people are doing.
Here's why. And again, I know this is not a sports podcast, but here's why. I was a goalkeeper. And I literally could never win the game. I could not lose the game for us, but I couldn't win it. So that meant I had to have massive respect for the forward line, for everybody else playing every other position, which comes with recognizing that when you really are part of a team, you have to bring different skill sets to the table. And that's a really powerful, I think, lesson to learn as a young person, because then you begin to appreciate differences in people and you don't shy away from your own weaknesses. You look for people who amplify you and make you even better at your job.
I love that.
I love this word amplify. Yeah. So
I've never, like, the goalies have no glory. Like they're just they don't get to kick the. Wow, that's fascinating. Just from a philosophical sports analogy, I think that's fascinating, and what an amazing lesson that you shared. I love that. Thank you. Speaking of philosophies, one of the things we do at Serotonin, aside from communication and brand building, is we actually work with people on their personal brands. One of the tools that we use that we think are really highly effective, and it's just such a fun thing to keep your eye on as you grow, is the concept of Ikigai, which is the Japanese framework for sort of finding your purpose in life. And I know I've heard you speak about it as well. How has Ikigai helped you steer your trajectory?
Well, I love any opportunity to talk about Ikigai because I think it is just this wonderful framework for helping people find a life of purpose. And so if people don't know what Ikigai is, it is this intersection of what you love with what you are good at, with what the world needs, and ultimately what you can get paid for. And this gives you this, I think, literal interpretation is a reason for being. So it helps you identify your passion, your mission, your profession, and your vocation. And in the middle of that is your Ikigai. If you can find all those things, I think in America, we'd probably just call it a sense of purpose, right? In France, they call it the raison d'etre, right? What is your reason for being? And it's a really beautiful thing to think about because I think there's a lot of climate anxiety in a post-COVID world. There's a lot of just real concern about what our new world looks like. And this very grounding opportunity to really hone in on where you can find happiness and contribute to society.
Yeah, what I love about Ikigai is it actually asks some questions that I don't think in Western culture we're really comfortable answering. What can you offer the world? What are you good at? What is your passion? I think we throw that word around a lot, passion, but really like, do I think about what I'm passionate about? I think it's a really important question. And then, what can I offer the world? I don't think we really ask those questions enough. And I love the Ikigai too. We use it sort of as a tool when working with clients on big and small projects just to really hone in. I frame the Ikigai framework as it's a process, something that you could seriously evaluate on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's not like you fill it out once and you know your purpose in life, right? It's something that you have to contemplate over time and it shifts and changes and evolves. And I think that it asks some good questions that I think we need to do more of.
I love that articulation, Casey, of Ikigai as a journey, that it gives us the freedom to evolve and to learn. And I also think it's really important because it helps you identify your value system. And if you
Yeah.
don't know your values, it's hard to develop a North Star. I was just listening to a podcast with Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist out of Wharton, and he was interviewing the first female commandant of the Coast Guard. And she was speaking about how important it is when you're building a team to look for shared values over skills.
Yeah.
Because if you have shared values and shared philosophy, for the most part, your skills can grow, you can develop, but you can't change necessarily a shared value system or create it out of thin air. And so these are, I think, some of the guideposts along the way that help you understand who am I, how do I get there, where do I want to go, and how do I do it in a way, like you were saying, that benefits more than just yourself, that benefits the world. How do you prioritize community and fairness, wealth building for all, the inclusivity? How do you do that? You need to have this North Star with a constant iteration.
Right. And I think that more and more people are figuring out their values and adjusting accordingly, right? Like I think people are voting with their talent. I think more and more every day people are reassessing if the company they work for aligns with their values. Is the work that they're doing align with their values? You know, do you wake up in the morning and feel good about your impact on the world? And so from like a branding marketing perspective, are the goods and services that I'm purchasing align with my values, which is, I think, a huge impact that individuals can have. But then on the flip side, is the company you work for up to snuff? And are you living according to your ikigai based on who you're interacting with and who you're working for? So that's...
Well, you probably know this because of the wonderful work that you guys do in brand and strategy. But someone recently shared with me the brand and creative brief for President Obama. And it was like 350 pages. And it was a narrative that just evolved because they were trying to really pull out his values, his authenticity, what life really meant to him. 300 and something pages to develop a logo. I just think that's so fascinating to understand.
Can you share that with me?
Yeah,
I want to see that.
That storytelling narrative process. And I mentioned it because about as we look at voting with our wallets and the type of habits and new products that we pursue or endorse. A lot of that has to do with brand building. What is a brand about and that type of inquiry. But yeah, it applies everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. In this day and age, when the dispersion of goods and services are such that back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where you had like 3 options for a mouthwash or 5 options for a TV, right? Like now we have so much decision paralysis and option paralysis where there's so really to stand out amongst the crowd. Not only is it supremely important to have a developed brand, but more and more it's having a developed brand and brand story that aligns with people's values. Like you can have a really cool, slick brand, but at the end of the day, you know, are you a super extractive supply chain and you're, you know, like, or are you adding to the problem or adding to the solution? So like an extra layer of branding and storytelling that I think companies and people need to start weaving into their narratives.
Right. Well, I think people will struggle to figure out, like, particularly amongst leadership and particularly amongst politicians, who are these people that were voting into office? And I love strategic brand work because it's very much aligned with how I think about the work I want to do and how do I execute. So I always start with what's something that I can bring to the table as me, as Janelle, that I've had many years to work on, still a work in progress. And then what are the values around that? And then can I articulate my own mission and vision? And I always like to think about some just real high, audacious purpose that's almost unattainable so that I'm constantly striving and building that narrative and building that story and then coming back and checking in with myself. But it really begins with who am I, what are my values? And can I create a mission and a vision that align with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the way I articulate effective communication is like there's 3 ingredients. Number 1 is what you just said, is knowing who you are and what is my mission, a very clear vision, mission, values. I know who I am. I knew who I am showing up. And then number 2 is knowing who your quote unquote competition is. So what's that brand positioning opportunity, right? So they're saying this, well, maybe I'll say this to sort of offset and stand out. And then arguably number 3, most importantly, is knowing your audience. And that just comes from empathy. It just comes from knowing who they are and their deepest, darkest wants and desires. And then how can you speak to them where and how they need to hear those things. And if you do those 3 things, it's like rocket fuel for communication, right? Like, you know where you stand, what the field looks like, and who your audience is.
Well, that's an interesting sort of trifecta, very powerful, because I often wonder about that with climate. Not everybody wants to talk about climate change. Different people in different times in their life find it more or less relevant based on the time scale of the issue maybe we're talking about. Or for some people, it's not that it's unimportant, but there are basic needs that need to be met. And actually, that's why I think the work that you guys are doing is so important, is because you're helping people like me figure out how to have better conversations, how to listen better, so that we can understand how do we engage in meaningful dialogue so that everybody is benefiting and that the planet is benefiting. And so I'm wondering, I know you're interviewing me, but I'm wondering if you've had to change some of your strategic thinking around your climate work. And did that require sort of a rearticulation of some of the skill sets you had, or really, I imagine it's very challenging?
Yeah, I mean, the answer I think would be yes and no. I think working in climate and landing squarely with an audience that can hear it and perceive it is challenging. You have to say the right things to the right people at the right times in order for them to even hear it, right? But on the other hand, really fundamentals of communication are just that fundamental there. I go back to the 3 pillars of good communication. If you do those things, like another sort of tactic, creative tool that we use, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but like show, don't tell is a big creative guiding principle that we use, where and we see this almost every day. You get a famous person on the TV saying the world's on fire and we need you to give your support and the things are bad and you need to stop using plastic and stop using so much water. That's telling people what to do. And telling people what to do is a very ineffective form of communication. But if you show them in the ways they need to hear it and in the things that they care about the most, and these are all fundamental things. I need to make money to feed my family and put clothes and have shelter. And so, okay, well, there's 4 things right there that we could talk about without talking about the environment. Right. You just talk about how things are changing and affecting those things. At least they'll start to hear that. I'm fascinated. And actually this week is the Hollywood Climate Summit happening in LA, where there's a lot of amazing people talking about storytelling and how do we weave these super important narratives into the communication. It's super challenging. There's so many things out there that don't land well. And I think it's challenging, but I think if you know what you're doing and you know your audience, I think that's the biggest thing, is just knowing who you're talking to in order to really figure out how they need to hear it.
So I love this, because you're talking about what you're fascinated about. So one of the things that this excites me is language choice. And so there's sort of 2 things that come to mind. One is the show, or don't tell.
Should tell. Yeah.
Yeah. I think about the difference between something that is bold and something that is vibrant. And because bold new policies for climate. I mean, how often have you seen that headline? And it feels very, I'm going to tell you I'm bold, versus can you create a vibrant, like people are drawn to vibrancy, and that
words are everything,
right? And so that's one fascination I have, is kind of like how we articulate that. The other about Ikigai is how other cultures manage to capture so many emotions and feelings in single words. Mm-hmm. So the Japanese have a phrase shinrin-yoku, which means forest bathing. That is the literal meaning.
Forest bathing.
But the bigger meaning is the interconnectedness and the feeling of peace and grounding that we get when we wander in a forest and we let our concerns grow. That's a lot of words in English, right? Or the Norwegians have one. It's friluftsliv, and it basically describes the value of spending time in remote locations for spiritual and physical well-being. One word to say these beautiful health benefits.
I'd write that down, but there's no world I would know that spell.
I'll send it to you. But I mention them because these are climate words.
Yeah.
They are philosophies. In Judaism, we have a philosophy of tikkun olam, and it literally means the repair of the world. And the idea is what can we do to help repair the world? And that is where a lot of my philosophy around climate work comes. Yeah. And so it's just this beautiful philosophical and sometimes existential journey to bring people together to feel something bigger than a single word.
Right. So love everything you just said.
I didn't know I was going there.
So if only we were recording this.
Oh, cheers.
Here's why. Because I actually collect those. I
Oh,
actually collect those terms and phrases. I mean, obviously ikigai is one. Kintsugi is another, right? Where a Japanese term where they lean into, so it's sort of the principle of like the broken parts that heal are stronger, you know. And
yes.
so there's the
It's the
kintsugi,
whole, yeah.
kintsugi pottery, right? Where they, if a pot breaks, they put it back together with gold leafed, you know, glue or whatever. And I love because they're simple phrases that tell a story, and that's exactly precisely what I'm talking about. And now you have these little wrappers for big concepts that
That's
are
right.
interesting, right? And so our personal branding platform called Cero, our tagline is Nocete Ipsum, and Nocete Ipsum was carved on the entrance of Apollo's temple in Delphi in Greece, and it means know thyself.
Mm.
And it has to do with, obviously, personal branding is knowing who you are and then showing up in genuine and authentic ways. And so I love those little, yeah, those are great. I'm writing all of those down.
I'll give you one more. The
Yep.
Finnish one, it's Sisu, Sisu. This one's great because it's stoic determination, but also grit and bravery and resilience. It's all these really strong words. So we
Great.
should compare notes because I also am fascinated by the ability for different cultures to capture really big feelings
Yeah.
that so multifaceted. And how do we then as Americans interpret those and bring those into our lives?
Love it. Yeah, let's trade. Let's trade.
Yeah.
Is there a term for those? What is that? Like, I've been collecting them without even knowing it.
That's a great question. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I know now what I'm going to get you. This big poster I have of Friedrichs Loop. You're going to get one.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, I mean, they're like single word or 2-word phrase ideologies or philosophies.
Well, isn't that what a logo is supposed to do, right? A brand,
For
right?
visuals, yeah. I mean,
Feel a lot.
interesting, yeah. But you have to interject over time the meaning. The classic example would be the Nike swoosh, which comes from, was it the Greek god? And so there's a story there, and it's the wings, right? So like there's some good storytelling there. Now they just use the logo. They even have Nike on it. But that took time. I don't think a lot of people know. I think I was talking about this a few weeks ago about just do it. The concept, the tagline, just do it. They didn't come up with that till like 16, 18 years after the company was founded. It took them almost 2 decades to even come up with that tagline. We think it's been an integral part of the brand from the get-go, but no, it took a while. And if you think about just do it, it has nothing to do with shoes. It's a philosophy, it's a mentality, it's a lifestyle. It's exactly what we're talking about. It's not telling you we're a shoe company. Nike, run fast. Like it's not that.
It's not telling you where to live. It's interesting. I had a professor. I went to Stanford Law School, and I had a professor who was really, really adamant. Her name was Barbara Babcock, and unfortunately she's passed away, but she was one of the first women to graduate from Yale Law School and just a huge hero for me. She said, I am never going to teach you what to think. I will always teach you how to think.
Yes.
And what a powerful distinction. And I think it's kind of a little bit or a lot of what you're talking about, because if you have the framework and you can begin to draw your own conclusions as opposed to, again, somebody putting it on you. So it's a lot of power in that.
Yeah. I keep kind of saying this, but it's very simple and very complex. Like it sounds like there's a lot to it, but it's pretty foundational to just who we are as human beings.
Right. How to think, not what to think. And I think it gives people a lot of freedom to find, their ikigai, to find their sisu, who they are, and share that with the world.
Wow. So you work in a lot of, I would say, high anxiety, high stakes environment, right? I mean, like your sea level rise and social and environmental impact issues. What keeps you hopeful? What keeps you engaged and not just crumble under the weight of anxiety?
Well, I want to answer it in 2 ways, because I want to plug my new favorite book, which is a book called Nar Country by Stephen Kotler. And Stephen is the head of the Flow Collective, and he's an athlete who has worked with academics and scientists to understand what happens to us from a chemistry and a physiology perspective that enables us to hit what is called flow. You are so immersed in a task or a sport, and you have some level of expertise that you don't even notice time go by. And I have to share that when I was in high school, I really loved playing basketball. I just wasn't fast enough and big enough to play in college, but that was my first love. And I had 2 games in high school where I had flow. I could hit a basket no matter where I was on the court. And I never knew what that was called until I read Stephen Kotler's stuff. And so now he's got this book in Our Country that he's calling sort of an anti-aging book, but basically it's an encouragement to understand that as we get older, we refine ourselves and our brain does change, but we don't have to lose those special things that make us so agile and so capable. But you have to use them. It is a use it or lose it scenario. And so he sets out as an expert skier to ski terrain parks at age 50, which apparently is unheard of. I'm not a very good skier, but apparently it's quite difficult at that age. Yeah. And he nails it. He puts out his list of tricks and he hits them and he achieves his goals. But through the book, he really helps understand how do you stay calm in the face of danger. I mean, he's skiing. And one of those things is curiosity, constant curiosity, because curiosity and anxiety physiologically come from the same place from a chemical perspective in your body. And one way to really combat that is to be curious rather than anxious. And I have been told many a time that I'm quite curious. So that might be an inherent superpower for me, that it staves away anxiety because my default is to be very curious.
That's outstanding. I love that. Wow. Well, thank you for that, Janelle. I could chat with you all day, but this has been it's been an amazing, informative conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. I look forward to more with you.
Sounds good.